back down and shut your trap. It's time for
Keeping It Sports with M3.
Are you ready?
Are you ready?
Well, I'll need some beer.
Are you ready?
You have to ask me nicely.
Come on now, don't be bashful.
Are you ready? Are you ready for
Place for the best sports talk and news surrounding each league.
I can prove it with my usual flawless logic.
Hey, man, this time I'm going to do it my way.
What's your name again?
And now, here's your host, M3, Mike Rosansky. Coming to you from Cherry Hill, New Jersey. It's time for Keeping It Sports with M3, powered by the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. Good afternoon, everyone. I am, of course, Mike M3 Rosansky, coming to you on this Monday, the 14th day of the month of October. Hope you're all having a great day. Hope you all had a very good weekend. If you're watching this on Facebook right now, you will see that I'm in my Jets gear as it's game night. It's Jets game night. The Jets have a home game tonight on Monday Night Football against the Buffalo Bills. So by the time that I post the podcast version of this, hopefully I'll be in a very pleasant mood. Hopefully I won't be downtrodden. Hopefully I won't be saying that ugly term that I keep hoping that the Jets can avoid, can eliminate from their vocabulary, and that being same old Jets. But a lot to get to throughout the podcast today. Give you some thoughts on the baseball postseason as we have now advanced to the league championship round with both of our New York City teams, the Yankees and the Mets, involved. Give you some thoughts on the action in week 6 and one division that seems to want to grasp the NFL and put it in a stranglehold, as well as you didn't think I was going to just avoid it. You didn't think I was not going to talk about it. And that was the ass kicking that the Cowboys received in Dallas yesterday, and why sometimes wins can feel like losses in the same game, no matter how much of a beatdown it is as far as the final score is concerned. But I'll get to all of those as we move along here. I'll get to a lot of things involving the NFL. But of course, I've got to start with what happened last week as I was posting the podcast, as I was heading into work last Tuesday in what was a very difficult, very exhausting week for yours truly at Amazon. And that was the news that the New York Jets fired their head coach, Robert Saleh. And I had felt going into this season that Robert Saleh was on the hot seat. I had thought after that loss in London that Robert Saleh's seat was going to be even hotter, but I never thought that he was going to get fired mid-season just because it's something Woody Johnson has never done, despite how awful an owner he has been in his time having controlling interest of this team, even during the time when he was away in the UK as an ambassador and let his brother Christopher run the organization. He has not made this kind of impactful move mid-season. Even when Adam Gase was stinking up the joint and losing the first 13 games of the pandemic 2020 season, they stuck with him till the end and fired him at year's end. Even as much of a clown show it was toward the end of the Rex Ryan, John Izek era, they both got to finish out that season. Hell, even as atrocious as some of the Todd Bowles years were, he got to finish out the season. But Woody Johnson realized that this was different, that the expectations are ratcheted up here and a change needed to be made. Because when you have Aaron Rodgers as your quarterback, despite him coming off of an Achilles injury last year, despite the fact that he is 40 years old, there is no wait and try to be patient. There is no, oh, we can play for tomorrow. Because tomorrow may not come for this franchise. Tomorrow has really never come for this franchise. They've never had longing success, especially in the time that I have been a fan of this team. He realized that with this slow start, with so much chaos going around this team, the offense not performing well, you're starting to hear grumblings in the locker room. A leader like Quincy Williams coming out after the game in London and saying that there's got to be some honesty here. There's got to be some people being held accountable from the top to the bottom. When you have a player coming out after a game saying that damning a level of comment, that's a problem. That's something that just can't be avoided, and something that Woody Johnson realized had to be done here as far as a change is concerned. You couldn't just continue on with the same old. I mean, look at what Saleh has done in his 4 years here. He has the worst winning percentage of any Jets coach through 40 games in history. Even worse than Todd Bowles. Even worse than Bruce Coslet. Hell, Rich Kotite didn't even make it 40 games. Otherwise, he would have been number one on this list. But Robert Saleh, as good a guy as he was, and I always credit him for being a stand-up human being, he was completely different. He almost, and I know this is going to sound bad saying this, he pretty much neutered himself as the Jets head coach. And why I say that is because you watched him when he was the defensive coordinator with the 49ers. He was fiery. He was running up the sidelines, pumping guys up, talking to players when the defense wasn't on the field, coaching them up. At times, when necessary, would be a disciplinarian for certain players if things got out of hand and were worried about, possibly creating costly penalties for the team. You never saw that here with the Jets. The only time I ever, for one possible moment, saw something like that is in the last couple of weeks when Michael Clemens created a late hit out of bounds. Other than that, you really never saw him talking to players. You never saw him coaching guys up in the middle of games, creating adjustments. He would always talk about, we'll overcome these penalties. We'll work on these issues. Well, they continued to be issues. They continued to be a problem for this team that he never truly recovered from, that he never truly looked at and said, hey, something has got to be done here about this. Something just doesn't seem right about this. He let so much go on, and I know you could argue that, hey, he never had the greatest of quarterback situation. When you look at these 40 games, should I say 56 games, that he started as head coach for this team, during these 56 games that he was the head coach for this team, he had Zach Wilson as the starting quarterback for a large majority of them, 33. He had 7 with Mike White, only 6 with Aaron Rodgers, 5 with Joe Flacco, 3 with Trevor Siemian, and then 2 with the legendary Tim Boyle. So that's not very much of an impressive quarterback list. He always had talent on the defensive end, and the defense always played well under him. But the defense at times was run into the ground because they had to play at a top 5 level just to keep the team competitive in games, just keep them good enough to hope for a prayer, hope for a miracle, and allow the Jets to possibly come back in some of these games. When I heard of this firing, a couple of things came to my mind. First off, the mixed reports on how they handled this, whether it was a conversation between Woody Johnson and Aaron Rodgers that was the ultimate decider here. We'll never know. Aaron Rodgers, as much as I love him, can go on McAfee all he wants and say he loved and respected Robert Saleh, but actions that we saw on the sidelines spoke differently with how these two felt about each other. Especially, it seems Rodgers never really got over the fact that Saleh fined him for missing that mini camp back in June when he went on the trip to Egypt. Then you will look at the whole hug, non-hug spot against the Patriots, which you could argue was overblown, but there was definitely a look there from Rodgers. And then on top of that, the fact that it sounds like Robert Saleh was ready to move on from Aaron Rodgers' coffee boy, Nathaniel Hackett. You just start piecing these things together. It felt more and more like Robert Saleh was eventually going to be a dead man walking. But when he got fired, if the reports are true that he was escorted out through the front door by security, that's not a great look there. At least let the man have some dignity and go out the back door and not have to walk through everybody there after just getting fired. Hopefully that did not happen. But I was very glad that after this move was made, that Nathaniel Hackett was not made the head coach. If you named Nathaniel Hackett the head coach, you might as well have named Aaron Rodgers the head coach. It should have gone to and was named that the defensive coordinator, Jeff Albright, becomes the interim head coach. He came into this year as a guy that people looked at as an eventual head coach candidate. And now he gets his chance to show what he can do for the final 12 games of this regular season. And hopefully he brings an emotional uplift to this team. Hopefully he holds guys accountable. Hopefully the words that he said last week were not just lip service about there needing to be change here, having a game plan. Hopefully that he's going to stick to that and not going to be just a repeat of what Robert Saleh was. Now, you could argue it's a good first step by removing play calling duty from Nathaniel Hackett and going to the quarterback's coach, Todd Downing. But then again, you look at it and say, then why is Nathaniel Hackett even here if he's the offensive coordinator and not going to be calling plays? But I don't think it's just play calling that's the problem here. The problem here is the Jets' offensive scheme. They have an offense that ranks bottom 5 in the NFL, and that's because there's no creativity to this. There's no finding ways to scheme open Garrett Wilson. There's not a lot of plays where you're seeing both of your young, very talented running backs in Breece Hall and Braylon Allen on the field together, creating some kind of deception for the other team to go up against. I've said for a long time here that it feels like what the Jets have done when it comes to the offense the last 3 regimes is just hire somebody's best friend. Whether it be when Adam Gase was running this offense, he was hired because he was Peyton Manning's coffee boy once upon a time. Or when Robert Saleh became the head coach, he brought in Mike LaFleur because him and Matt LaFleur are best friends. And now with Nathaniel Hackett, they clearly brought him in because he was the offensive coordinator under Aaron Rodgers' 2 most recent MVP awards. But a lot of that offense was styled around what Aaron likes, what Aaron's comfortable with. And clearly what Aaron's comfortable with is not what's best in the modern NFL, not what's best for a team to have success in this modern NFL. So Aaron has got to be willing to make adjustments. Aaron has got to be willing to take a step back from this idea that we can't have pre-snap motioning, that he doesn't like the idea of having multiple running backs on the field or just scheming ways up to have Garrett Wilson open. It has to be more than just about his arm talent and his way of outsmarting people. It has to be a creative, collective way of doing things. But something needed to change here, folks. And Robert Saleh, while, as I said, he's a good man, that was the first step to changing things. The second step is seeing a difference and a change in this offense. But with Saleh getting fired, this should be a sign to other NFL teams that you shouldn't be apprehensive of firing your coach mid-season or early in this NFL season. Saleh handled himself the right way. You saw in his statement, he didn't take shots at the organization. He was very thankful for this opportunity. And hopefully, if he does get another head coaching spot down the road, he will handle himself much better. He didn't make himself one big giant ass like we are seeing down I-95 over here in the city of brotherly love with Nick Sirianni. I wanted to throw something at my TV yesterday, and I'm not even an Eagles fan with the crap that I saw from Nick Sirianni. How he had the gall to go to war with the Eagles fan base after their home victory against the Cleveland Browns, a home victory that they barely eked out a win that they were going up against probably the most dysfunctional, out of place, out of sorts quarterback in the sport right now in Deshaun Watson, although Will Levis is probably thinking of new ways to create a turnover and tell Deshaun Watson, hold my beer. But you barely held on. You won 20-16. You didn't blow them out despite how poor this team has played, despite the fact they're the only team that has not scored 20 points in a single game this year. And the Eagles, historically under Andy Reid, were a team that came out of bye weeks looking great, looking dominant, looking ready to go. That was anything but the case here, even with Jalen Hurts playing a rather clean game. Even with the fact A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith were back from injuries. But after the game, you had fans that were chanting for Sirianni to be fired. Hell, during the game, there were probably some chants as well. And you see Sirianni turning around, mouthing off at fans in the stands, put a finger to his right ear and was chirping at fans in the front row. And then after the game, he's sitting there in front of the media with his son on his lap, trying to somehow defend his actions, saying that players were saying to him, hey, coach, we need more of this energy. We like this from you. It's one thing if you're doing it in the week leading up to the game, like Rex Ryan used to talk some trash, create some buzz, create some headlines talking about the opposition in the week leading up to games. But after the game is over, when you barely survived one of the worst teams in the NFL, you're at home and doing it to your own fans? Dude, what the hell is that? I guarantee that's not what players were asking for. Hell, you even look at that press conference. His son is sitting on his lap, almost saying with his facial reactions, with his hands on his ears, probably like, Dad, shut the hell up. You sound like a fool. And I'm 5-6 years old. And even I realize this. it was just all the way around an awful look for an Eagles head coach. So if Robert Saleh, for a 2-3 start, can be fired, can be moved on to a coordinator, the Eagles sure can do the same with Nick Sirianni, because that team has not been the same since they lost both of their coordinators after their Super Bowl loss to the Kansas City Chiefs a year and a half ago. We saw this team collapse, fall apart after that loss to the 49ers at home. Remember the whole thing with Big Dom and everything, getting in the altercation with Dre Greenlaw and some of the other guys on the 49ers defense? And when you have a quarterback who's in his mid-20s in Jalen Hurts, who acts like more of the adult in the room than Nick Sirianni ever has at any point in his head coaching tenure, he should definitely be on a very high alert hot seat, especially if they lose to the Giants this coming Sunday. Because you look at that NFC East, the Washington Commanders, I'm not the biggest on moral victories, but lost while looking impressive against the Ravens yesterday, even despite not having the ball much in that game. The Giants lost one of the more hideous games that you could play last night against the Bengals, even though there was plenty of opportunities for them to take that game. And then there's, of course, the Cowboys, the mess that keeps on giving, that we'll talk about as we go on here. So that division is right there up for grabs. But Nick Sirianni could be what holds the Eagles back. And at some point, Howie Roseman and that hierarchy over here in the city of brotherly love could take a look at things and say, you know what? We have a squad that can do some fun, good things this year. But this immature punk who's supposed to be the adult in the room is what's going to bring us down. We've spent so many resources in making this team great, but he is what is going to hinder them in the end. So Nick Sirianni should be the next guy that we're on the watch for on being on the potential shot block. All right, got plenty left to get to throughout this podcast. I'm going to give you some thoughts on the MLB postseason coming up, mix in some more thoughts on Week 6 in the NFL and how, unlike the NFC East, where that's up for grabs, but no one seems to want to run away with things, there's another division that seems like it might be just an outright war to the finish. Mix in some thoughts on the Knicks, the Cowboys. Oh, plenty to get to through the next about 40 minutes or so here. I'm going to try to fit it all in before I got to take off for MetLife tonight. So as I tell you guys each and every single week at this time, please sit back, relax, help put your feet up if you feel like it, and continue keeping it sports with M3.
I'll be back.
I'm sure MLB has got to be doing cartwheels right now over how their postseason has gone so far. Because unlike the wild card round, you didn't see any sweeps in the division series. You got at least 4 games out of each one of those series. In the case of the Guardians and the Tigers, and the Padres and Dodgers, you actually got a 5th decisive game in those, with big-time pitchers going up against each other and putting up awesome performances, especially in that Dodgers-Padres game on Friday night. Well, the Padres lost the game. Yu Darvish has got nothing to be ashamed of. He was excellent in that series in both of his starts. It's just so happens that the Padres offense died in the final 24 innings of that series. From the third inning on of Game 3, they did nothing. They were sleepwalking and tried to rely on their pitching to carry them the rest of the way, even losing a game to the Dodgers in which the Dodgers were throwing out their entire bullpen in Game 4. And that's the only thing that really concerns me about the Dodgers going forward. The Dodgers were the best team record-wise in baseball during the regular season. But as we saw as this postseason has gone on, they have lost available pitchers to them. You have Jack Flaherty. You have Yamamoto. You have Walker Buehler, who is inconsistent but has really good stuff. But to have to rely on your bullpen to essentially be one of your 4 starters for a game in the postseason is a very dangerous road to go down, especially when you have Yamamoto only going 5 innings in Game 5 against the Padres. Jack Flaherty is a guy that can get you through 7 innings, but most nights you're going to need 2 or 3 relievers to finish a game for him. Walker Buehler, not a guy that typically goes deep in games. And when you go with these bullpen games, you have to rely on at least 6, possibly 7 relievers to all be excellent on one night. And in all likelihood, that's not going to be the case. There's going to be somebody, whether it's your closer, whether it's your bulk guy that gives you 2-3 innings in the middle of the game, somebody is not going to perform at the level you expect them to be in those games. Despite how deep the Dodger bullpen is, despite how excellent that they have been during the regular season into this postseason, at some point you expect somebody is going to have an off night. Somebody is going to fail. That's why, even despite the Mets' lackluster offense last night, despite the fact that outside of Francisco Lindor, you have a lot of guys that are slumping at the exact wrong time for the Mets. I am not willing to pour cold water on the Mets in this series just yet. After one game, yeah, they got smacked around last night. Yeah, Jack Flaherty completely shut them down, and they had seemingly no offense. By the time they started showing a little bit of life, started to get some action on the base paths, they were already down 6-0, and it was going to be a very tall task to overcome considering how well Flaherty was pitching in that game, not giving up a base runner through the first 3 innings, how good the Dodger bullpen has been, and a pitching staff in total that has not given up a run in their last 33 innings combined as a staff, dating back to the 3rd inning of Game 3 against the Padres. That was going to be a rough task because this Met team, they've relied a lot on their pitching to get here. They've relied on getting clutch, timely hits. They weren't blowing out the Phillies in any of those games. They survived Zach Wheeler long enough in Game 1 that they were able to take advantage of the Philly bullpen. Then in Game 2, you had an off night by the Mets pitching staff, even with having a 3-0 lead going into the 6th inning. But after that, their pitching staff shut down the Philadelphia Phillies. Sean Manaea was great for 7 innings in Game 3. Quintana was really good in Game 4. You got impressive work out of the bullpen from the likes of David Peterson in relief of Quintana in Game 4, a move that at the time, I will be honest, I questioned because they were bringing him in the middle of an inning, but he was very impressive, getting out of that spot, and I thought should have closed out the game rather than going with the adventure per second that is Edwin Diaz. But this Met team has earned our trust throughout the year, has showed a lot of heart, has showed a lot of fight, has showed a lot of tenacity that every time you think they're down, they have a rebound game. Now, I didn't like how they handled their pitching staff in Game 1 because I know that you can't bring Kodai Senga in and out of the bullpen. But having a limited pitcher like this that can only give you 35 to 40 pitches at most, and you're knowing that unless he's perfect and can give you 3 innings, you're going to have to rely on around 7 innings from your bullpen. A Met bullpen that has gotten better as the season's gone on, but is not as deep as the Los Angeles Dodgers bullpen. And I'll tell you one thing that I didn't like about how Carlos Mendoza is handling his bullpen. Why is Jose Butto been relegated to the lack of trust kind of reliever? Why are you using him in a 6-0 blowout? Why did you wait a week to use him? Why wasn't he someone that you brought in after Quintana, got that final out, and then you let Peterson roll for 2 or 3 innings in Game 4? Why are you going a full week before pitching this kid and then bringing him in when you're already down by a grand slam in this game? That was the one thing that I found very questionable about how Carlos Mendoza handled the pitching staff in Game 1. But I still have faith in this Mets team. I still have a belief in them. They've earned that trust. They've earned that reliability from us, despite the fact that outside of Lindor's heroics in Game 4 with the grand slam, that Citi Field might still be shaking after. You haven't gotten a lot of productivity. You haven't gotten a lot of offense from this team. And there's some guys that are in big-time major funks. Pete Alonso has been relatively quiet since that home run against the Brewers in the wild card round. You have a lot of these guys that were ancillary pieces that were cute stories as the year went on, whether it be Jesse Winker or Jose Iglesias that have gone quiet, that maybe you should consider benching one of those guys and bringing in Jeff McNeil to play if he's healthy enough to go. Because the one thing you know about McNeil, for as much as a pain in the ass attitude-wise he can be at times, he'll work a more quality at bat than those guys and give you a better chance of creating traffic on the base paths than these guys who have been fun stories, but at some point fun stories hit their finishing point. I'm not going to declare the Mets dead off of one loss, despite how great the Dodger lineup can be, how great the Dodgers bullpen can be. But if you want this fun, cute story to keep going, I think it's very important that they get back to Citi Field 1-1. You want to have that crowd energized on Wednesday night. You want them to have a belief. You want the chant of "Let's go Mets," the "you gotta believe" mentality, the "oh my God," having grimace dancing in the crowd. You want all of that. You don't want Met fans sitting there after potentially, if say they lose Game 2 6-1, getting outscored in 2 games in LA, and you're wondering, can we even put up a fight? Can we even survive a chance against this Dodger team? Yeah, it's MLB's ultimate goal for a Dodgers-Yankees World Series. But the Mets have been great at spoiling everybody's party all year long, spoiling what MLB wants. Here's the challenge. Go spoil them again. Because you know what MLB would be second most happy for if you didn't get Yankees-Dodgers? If you had a Subway Series. Yeah, I know the last time that it happened, it was the lowest rated World Series in the history of Major League Baseball. But there will be more intrigue about this World Series than there was that one because the Yankees aren't coming off of a dynasty. You have actual stars that people relate to on the Mets, like Lindor. You have all of the goofiness that's hung around this team all year long. Now, it's just about getting to that point. And in the Yankees' case, they've got another challenge ahead of them. Yes, they got by the Kansas City Royals, but a lot of that was based on pitching. A lot of that was based on how great the Yankee bullpen was. And the Yankee bullpen has performed like rock stars since September 6th when they promoted Luke Weaver to the closer role. They didn't give up a run in almost 16 innings against the Royals. That's how they were able to overcome the fact that this offense was lackluster. This offense was 6 for 35 with the runners in scoring position and got those timely hits. Will it be Giancarlo Stanton's go-ahead homer in the 8th inning of Game 3? Or striking early against Michael Wacha in Game 4, getting a couple of quick runs on the board against him, and then having an excellent outing from Garrett Cole. You need this lineup to start backing up the pitching staff. I know a lot of people are complaining about the idea of Rodon starting Game 1 because he collapsed in Game 2 against the Royals, and he is a guy that emotionally is a laugh per second. But at the same time, this offense needs to wake the hell up because this Cleveland Guardians team is no joke. They had the best bullpen ERA in baseball this season for a reason. Emmanuel Clase may have flamed out in Game 2 against the Tigers, but that has been the aberration for this guy's career. He has been off to a historic Hall of Fame pace over the first 5 years of his career with the Cleveland Guardians. He is a guy that has been a lights-out dominant reliever and has some excellent setup men leading up to him. You have to take advantage of these starters early on. You can't just think that you're going to rely on the Guardians bullpen to walk you back into a game like the Royals bullpen was. The Royals bullpen pretty much handed the Yankees a couple of games throughout this series. So the Yankee offense needs to wake the hell up. Giancarlo Stanton has had his moment, has done his part. But I need to see more than just a 3-hit game in Game 4 from Aaron Judge. I need to see continued great at-bats from Torres and Soto. And you know what? Jazz Chisholm, you talked a lot of ish in that series against the Royals. How about you back up some of your talk? You were guaranteeing a World Series. You were saying, oh, you're built for this moment. Dude, you were 2 for 15 against the Kansas City Royals. And you're the guy that they were booing, that they were smack-talking from that fan base the most in Games 3 and 4. And for a good reason, for all of your nonsense with talking about how the Royals were lucky in Game 2 and how your team is going to win your 28th World Series. It's time for you to step up. I love your youthful enthusiasm that you brought to this team, but it's time for you to step up and back up some of your talk. Otherwise, you just look like a fool. These Guardians, they're not the Minnesota Twins. Neither were the Royals. These AL Central teams are not going to make it easy on the Yankees. Even though people out there have tried to say that this is the easiest path that the Yankees have had to a World Series since 2009 because there's no Houston Astros. You don't have to deal with the Orioles, who were 9-4 against the Yankees this year. I don't believe in that mindset. I'm not a subscriber to that idea. You have to go out there and actually earn it. because these teams have a heart, have a tenacity to them that they're not afraid of this Yankee group. This Yankee group has won nothing and earned nothing so far, despite all of the money that they've put forward. They're in their fourth ALCS in the last 8 years. It's time to finally get back to a World Series and back up why you're the most historic franchise in baseball history.
I'll be back.
Now, I talked earlier about how wide open the NFC East is, considering it's still early, but the Washington Commanders are off to a 4-2 start and have looked the best at any of those teams. Well, you have the Eagles with all the chaos surrounding them at 3-2, the Cowboys at 3-3 after another disastrous loss yesterday that get to in a few minutes. And then there's, of course, the New York Giants, who lost an ugly game last night to the Cincinnati Bengals. But so far this season, the most competitive division, the best division in the entire NFL, has been the NFC North. I don't think there's any argument to be had here, especially when you look at these teams and you see that all of them are at least 2 games over 500. In the case of the Vikings, they're undefeated at 5-0. We're on a bye week this past weekend. And they're the only division in the league that has all 4 teams with a positive plus-minus differential. In fact, these 4 teams, the Vikings, Lions, Packers, and Bears, have the 4 highest plus-minus point differentials in the NFL. They have not just been winning games, but in some cases been kicking some teams' ass from pillar to post on both the offensive and defensive side of things. Remember how people were concerned about Caleb Williams after the first 2 weeks of the season, worried that maybe the Bears were going to ruin this kid and it was going to be a failure of a first overall pick, especially with the way Jaden Daniels has come out firing, looking like the front runner for the offensive rookie of the year. Well, Caleb Williams has started to close that gap and say, not so fast, Jaden Daniels, because what he has done these last 4 weeks has been remarkable. After starting off the season 1-1, having 0 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, he's gotten this Bears team off firing offensively these last couple of games. And I know you could say, oh, it's against teams like the Rams who are missing a lot of offensive firepower, been weak on the offensive line with some of their injuries, against the Panthers, who's everybody's homecoming game, and then against the Jaguars in London. But this Bears team, they have offensive weapons to them, much better around Williams than Justin Fields ever had during his 3+ years with the Bears. Even when guys are out injured, like Keenan Allen was early on, other guys are stepping up. They have an actual ground game in DeAndre Swift. They have so many ways that they can beat you as a collective offensive unit. And they're backing up a defense that is not great, is not completely locked down, shut down, but is providing that defense confidence, knowing that, hey, we have an offense that's going to back us up so we can pin our ears back a little bit and maybe take some chances down the field, take some shots at trying to steal the football rather than risk a pass interference penalty down the field. And what a difference a couple of years can be here, because all the talk that was surrounding Caleb Williams coming out of this draft is the same way we were talking about Trevor Lawrence when he was coming out of Clemson. But since last year, things have seemingly fallen apart there in Jacksonville. Remember, they lost his last 5 starts last season. They're off to a 1-5 start this year. You're already hearing whispers of whether or not Doug Peterson is in trouble. Now, Shad Khan has said that he is not in trouble and that he still has a belief in him. But at the same time, this is the same Shad Khan that financially backs his son to idiotically run a wrestling promotion. So he does a lot of questionable things at times, and nothing can be ruled out with this owner. But Trevor Lawrence, he's starting to regress here. I know that he doesn't have the same weapons as he did last year. He lost Calvin Ridley. You replaced him with Gabe Davis, who was good, but was a big part in creating a turnover for them yesterday. Amongst these self-inflicted wounds that Doug Peterson was talking about at halftime, whether it be Davis dropping a pass in the end zone on a drive that they had to settle for a field goal, or it be Evan Ingram fumbling after a reception in the third quarter, that every time the Bears saw a Jaguars turnover, they were able to capitalize that. They were able to build upon that lead and put the pressure on them. But the Bears are going to be in the mix of this all year long, it looks like, because I don't think all 4 of these teams are going to make the playoffs, just based on the fact that they got to play each other at some point, and they may start to cannibalize each other and allow someone else to sneak into one of these wild card spots. But all 4 of these teams are legitimate. We've seen the start the Vikings have gotten off to. The Bears have started to turn things around, especially at quarterback after what was a slow start. The Packers now have Jordan Love back and a little more in control of this offense after shaking off the rust last week, and they've been able to get past the drama from Romeo Doubs that got him suspended and blew out the Cardinals yesterday. And then there's the Lions who I came into this season predicting that they would win this division and represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. But it's very rare that you have such an ass-kicking on the road as they did to the Dallas Cowboys yesterday afternoon, and you come away feeling like you still lost the game, because that was just a heartbreaking moment in the third quarter when Aidan Hutchinson went down with a fractured left tibia. It looked on television bad, but then when you saw the replays on social media, it was just heart-wrenching. When you saw his leg snap in that fashion, you knew something was bad when he's ripping his gloves off on the ground and the entire team, and hell, even the entire Dallas Cowboy team, is on the field surrounding the cart. Guys essentially in tears because they see what he's meant for this team. What he's meant for the city of Detroit, being a native of Michigan and a guy that symbolizes the heartbeat of that city and that fan base to a very T. He has been a humongous part of that team's turnaround, and it's a loss that will be very much felt by that team for some time to come, because you don't just lose a defensive leader, a defensive captain, hell, your best player on that team, and magically snap your fingers and think everything's going to be all right. They've got to be already on the phone talking to teams saying, what's it going to take to get your pass rusher? I've heard some names thrown out there by people on TV so far today. I don't think that the Browns would trade Myles Garrett as bad as they are and as much as they need draft picks to rebuild that situation around the depressing clown show that they've become with Deshaun Watson. Maybe if things don't get resolved with the Jets, maybe you can work out some kind of a trade for Hassan Reddick and get him for a 3rd-round pick. There's got to be a bad team out there that's got a disgruntled edge rusher, whether it be Max Crosby with the Raiders, somebody that you go out there and get that can help this defense. Because you can't just, as good as that team has been, how they've been top 5 in the league in yards per game, in points per game, in stopping the run game. They've been excellent this year. All the way around, that roster is so deep. Jared Goff has played his best football of his career and has a deep arsenal of weapons surrounding him. I say it all the time. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. You have to have a backup plan here and someone that can come in that you can put in there as an edge rusher that maybe won't be as dominant as Aidan Hutchinson was because he was running away with the Defensive Player of the Year award, but someone that can be a rightful stopgap because this Lions team is fun to watch. They got a coach that is exuberant. A defense that's playing really well. Awesome offensive weapons. Hell, they're going out there and trolling teams like they were the Dallas Cowboys yesterday, continuing to run these plays with offensive linemen being ruled eligible. Hell, you're doing things like swing back passes to your right tackle. And it was just an all-around embarrassing day for the Dallas Cowboys. We shouldn't have been surprised by this. We've seen this so far this year, that the Dallas Cowboys are a one-trick pony. Outside of Dak Prescott to CeeDee Lamb, what is there that you can hang your hat on with the Cowboys? And no, I don't want to hear that Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence are injured and that would have changed things, because I don't believe that. That team, one way or another, maybe not 47-9, but one way or another was getting their ass kicked yesterday against that Lions team. Because as we've seen so far this year, if you out-physical the Cowboys, they will give up and quit. They are soft as you know what. They have no toughness. They have no second gear to them, where if their first option is not working, they can rely on something else because they can't run the football. You don't have a legitimate number 2 wide receiver behind CeeDee Lamb. And a lot of the stats that Dak Prescott is putting up, as we've seen over the course of his career, has been when the Cowboys are getting smacked around. And now you've got the highest paid quarterback in the sport, and you're getting smacked around for your 4th straight home game dating back to the postseason last year. And you know who you put the blame on this? And I know it's very easy, you could say, to put this blame, but it's clearly obvious. Jerry Jones, because he never shows any tough love with this team. Him being the owner, president, and general manager is the worst thing possible for this team, because rather than do what is right for the organization, rather than do what is correct for this team, he more so cares about being everybody's best friend. He more so cares about having a relationship with all of his players and is okay with mediocrity and okay with what he's comfortable with, rather than doing some uncomfortable things. That's why a guy like Derrick Henry is not a Dallas Cowboy right now. And God, he has got to be singing his blessings. He's got to be saying thank you, God, every single day that they did not have cap room. Because remember, he wanted to be a Dallas Cowboy. He had made that kind of obvious during the offseason. But Jerry Jones, in all of his stupidity, did not have the cap room available to him because he didn't have the CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott contracts locked down and secure yet. that prevented them from making any real improvements, any real upgrades during this offseason. But you watch them, they get pushed around on both sides of the line of scrimmage, and the second the opposition comes out there and smacks them in the face, they have no smack back. They have no fight back in this team. And it's typical of the Dallas Cowboys. That's why I've said before, they may call themselves America's team, not because of their fan base, but it's because of the fact that we all get to celebrate when they lose. They are obnoxious as hell, and while you wish no wrongdoing on their players, they get what they deserve. They get karma smacked in their face each and every single week at home. And quite frankly, with how obnoxious their fan base is and how obnoxious their owner is, it's rightfully deserved.
I'll be back.
It's rare that I talk about anything that goes on in the NBA preseason. Hell, I gotta be honest with you, with everything going on, with us being in week 6 of the NFL, the Major League Baseball playoffs going on, I'd completely forgotten about the NBA preseason and the fact that the regular season gets started in just about 9 days, especially for the Knicks, who will start off on, I believe it's the 23rd against the Boston Celtics. I'll have to recheck that, but I know they start off the season on the road in Boston against the defending NBA champion Boston Celtics. But that was a very weird situation last night at Madison Square Garden in the preseason game between the Knicks and the Minnesota Timberwolves, when you're seeing the situation that occurred in the second quarter of that game. Donte DiVincenzo, who just a couple of weeks ago was part of the package, traded to the Timberwolves to bring Karl Anthony Towns to the New York Knicks. He's going to the foul line, and then he starts mouthing off toward the Knicks bench. At first it sounded like it was directed toward Tom Thibodeau, and then you see he's getting in a back and forth with Knicks assistant coach Rick Brunson. It led to a point where after the game, when you're seeing the two teams go through the classic mosh pit of shaking hands, saying, hey, see you later on, enjoy your season, good luck. And you see Rick Brunson start yelling something at DiVincenzo. DiVincenzo fire back at him, saying, I wasn't even talking to you, kind of telling him, mind your own business. And then Rick Brunson saying that was some soft-ish there, saying stuff like, oh, I'm going to let you live, young fella. Like, that was really weird and inappropriate, and it's got to be an uncomfortable situation for Jalen Brunson, considering Donte DiVincenzo has been one of his boys dating back to Villanova. Hell, they were involved in each other's weddings, so they're like brothers. So I'm sure there's some kind of relationship along the way there between DiVincenzo and Rick Brunson. And to see them get so hot, so heated at each other, I thought was just an extremely weird thing to see, especially during a preseason game. And I've got to side with DiVincenzo here, because who knows what was told to him last year during practices, during that time when he became a starter on this team only due to injuries. He became a warrior for this Knicks team. He became a guy that was, at times, the Knicks' second best player, with them losing Randall from January 27th on. All the time that they were without OG Anunoby throughout the second half of the season. Him and Josh Hart really stepped up and were those second and third presence on this team behind Brunson at a time where they were lacking some severe depth on this team. And you got to imagine he's heartbroken not being a New York Knick. After they made that trade for Mikal Bridges, these guys probably thought, you know what? It's right back to the college days. We're back together, the four of us, the four Musketeers from the back-to-back championship teams. We're going to do some big things in New York, even though they were never going to be on the floor at the same time, based on schemes, based on if the opposition was running a small lineup, maybe they'd be on the floor for maybe 4 or 5 minutes together on a given night. There was never going to be a lot of time where you were going to see the Villanova four on the floor together. The only two guys that were ever truly guaranteed to start games for them were Brunson and Mikal Bridges. Hart and DiVincenzo's roles were up in the air, and DiVincenzo was most likely going to be going back to a reserve role. So he's got to be heartbroken over what's gone down in this last month. I don't blame him for having some kind of fire back there, but the nerve of Rick Brunson, you put your son in a really awkward situation, and it feels like Rick Brunson is only there because they were able to get Jalen Brunson. It feels like he has really no use to this Knicks organization other than the fact his son is the face of this franchise. I thought that was truly unprofessional by him, and he needed to grow up and act like the adult in that spot. Let the kid, and I say this with quotes because Donte DiVincenzo is in his later 20s. He's more than grown up at this point. Let him let out some emotion. Let him let out some heartbreak, because it's going to take a while for him to really fully emotionally recover from this trade. He probably never saw this coming, probably thought it was going to be the greatest thing in the world, getting to play with three of his closest friends in the world. And then 1 month before the season starts, he gets blindsided and gets his world upended. Thought, let him show some emotion, and Rick Brunson, be a little more professional, be a little more understanding in that spot. Now, last night, the New York Giants were on prime time once again, and I have to ask why NBC got this game. Because you knew the Giants were going to be bad coming into this year. Yes, they acquired Malik Neighbors through the draft, but there wasn't a lot of impressive things about this Giants team. Dexter Lawrence has played at an all-pro level once again this year. But you don't have a lot of things you look at with this Giants team and you say is overly impressive, especially the quarterback spot. And last night watching that game, I can understand why Giant fans get annoyed and upset watching Daniel Jones play quarterback, because that was a very winnable game for this Giants team. When you're watching the Bengals struggle to do anything offensively all night, their only big play was the 47-yard touchdown run by Joe Burrow on a complete defensive breakdown by the Giants in the first quarter, in which he converted a 3rd and 18 into a touchdown. But other than that, you weren't watching the Bengals do anything very impressive. It was their defense, which has been destroyed for most of this year, has had defensive breakdowns all across the field, blew a 2-score lead against the Ravens about a week ago. You let their defense come in and completely shut you down. And even when there were opportunities, I know the Giants were without Malik Neighbors, were without Devin Singletary. You had times where guys were in and out of the lineup, including Slayton. But there were opportunities to score against this Bengals defense. You had plenty of chances to come away with an upset victory on Sunday night, even despite the fact that you punted 4 times in the first half, you turned the ball over on downs twice, you had Greg Joseph miss 2 field goal attempts, and even got to a point where later stages of the third into the fourth quarter, Brian Daboll decided to go for every 4th down opportunity. There were chances for this Giant team, but you're watching Daniel Jones overthrow wide receiver after wide receiver after wide receiver and not give this Giants team a true legitimate chance at winning this game. Even when you tied the game up at 7, you never felt like there was a chance for the Giants to win just based off of the failed accuracy by Daniel Jones. And that's going to be the story of his time with this Giants team and why you're going to look back. And I truly believe with Daniel Jones, there's talent there, but he has not been coached right from the beginning. You have not worked on his strengths being brought to the table. The fact that he can run the ball a little bit, that the deep ball is not his forte, and that you should be more so running a lot of RPOs, setting up a lot of screen passes, and take advantage of the short plays in front of you rather than trying to always dial things up. Despite how strong his arm is, it's not an accurate arm. And I believe in the case of Daniel Jones, he's going to be somebody's Sam Darnold or Baker Mayfield, where maybe not in his second opportunity, but in his third opportunity, where he's in a training camp battle with a second-year quarterback and he manages to win the job, he's going to come away as that quarterback. Now, I don't know how tradable he is right now, considering his contract is still guaranteed, and there's not many takers out there. I mean, you would have thought maybe the Colts would be a team, but Joe Flacco's performed great for him. The Saints went with Spencer Rattler yesterday, and you're seeing that team quickly fall apart. Maybe the Panthers take a chance on him. Maybe you do a Daniel Jones for Bryce Young trade along with a pick at the trade deadline. But I really don't see anyone that would be jumping at the opportunity to trade for this guy right now. But I do think there is light at the end of the tunnel for him and the Giants. Him, based on the fact that we've seen plenty of quarterbacks over the years excel in their next opportunity. And in the case of the Giants, this was not Brian Daboll's draft pick. Brian Daboll, the way he has coached this team, getting a winning record in his first year as Giants head coach, and then keeping the team in a conversation for a playoff spot, even for as much of a disaster as the month of October was last year for them. The slow start and losing Daniel Jones due to injury. Tommy DeVito created a spark for them, kind of a Linsanity-like moment. Jabba Chamberlain, whatever former New York athlete that had a brief time to shine. He got that team to a place where in December they were still in the hunt at 5-8, but they didn't get over that hurdle and truly get into the postseason. He deserves the opportunity to draft his own quarterback, whether it's in this year's draft, which I think is becoming more and more likely. Whoever you like most out of this year's draft, and there's going to be the opportunity, if the Giants keep going at the pace they're going, to draft someone high in this draft. It's just a matter of who Daboll thinks is the best guy to develop and build this franchise around. But this Giants team, they're really going nowhere this year. Even despite how wide open the division is, with the Commanders getting off to a hot start, but it's early. The Eagles having an immature brat at head coach, and the disaster that the Cowboys are. The Giants have let opportunities slip through their fingers in an every given week kind of sport. And a lot of that is placed at the feet of this quarterback who you jumped at the opportunity to re-sign to a contract that he probably didn't deserve, has been an injury waiting to happen, and now you're just waiting to see who that next guy is after him. That Brian Daboll hopefully is the one to get the chance to develop. And that, my friends, was Keeping It Sports with M3 for Monday, October 14th, 2024. Everyone, please have a great night. Have a fun, safe, happy, healthy week. You get one life, people, so you might as well try to live it up. And I'll talk to you guys again, same time next week. Until then, peace.
We have to go. Good night, everybody.
I have had enough of you!
Thank you for all the fun. Thank you. Hey, shut up, will ya?
I don't want to see you. I don't want to hear you. I don't want to smell you. Now leave. I'll be back.